Hi. So we at Dhiway just decided to have this conversation put together in an ad hoc manner because a few of us have been talking about this important subject of data governance, especially when it comes to the aspect of blockchain, and realize that all our conversations are very interesting when we talk among ourselves, but we never get around to presenting it for an audience that is outside of the UA, and they might want to listen in, have an opinion, and some of the things we talk about are interesting to be enough to be shared and build on. So what we are going to do today is continue our conversations, but for a change, we are going to record this. And as always, for these topics, we have the three main instigators. So we have Satish, who is the CTO and founder at Dhiway, Amar, who leads the product and engineering team at Dhiway, and we also have Venkatesh Hariharan, or more popularly and known to everyone as Venky. Venky is the India representative of the Open Invention Network, also the public policy expert at Force United. And I'll kick this one off by asking a very simple question. And we'll see as to how, and probably I'll start off with asking this question to Venky and see, and then go around the room and take feedback. So a lot of the conversation around blockchain, if you see on social media, seminars and all of this, is essentially about blockchain as a solution for X. By X, I mean blockchain as a solution for a government project, blockchain as a solution for fintech, agriculture, and all of that. We don't usually hear much about the idea of what this blockchain is supposed to do in this project. And so how do you think that this entire topic of blockchain uh, should be presented to highlight the key value aspect of it? And will essentially have, you will have your say, Satish and Amar will have their say, and then we'll follow on from there. Go ahead then, please, Venky.
So, I guess in the 30 years that I've been in the industry, I've seen many hype cycles for different technologies. One of the things I've realized is that, ignore the hype and just figure out where is the real essence of it, where does it really add value from a user perspective. And when I look at blockchain, and when I look at one of the reasons why I was so excited about the technologies that Dhiway is building out, I think it's solving a real tangible problem in terms of the verifiability of data, because today we have data coming in from multiple sources. How do you kind of verify the authenticity of that? And the larger problem that solves is that today we are migrating from entirely paper-based ecosystems to digital ecosystems. We are integrating credentials on the fly using open APIs in multiple workflows. So in that kind of an ecosystem, I think a technology like the ones that Dhiway is working on plays in. It's a practical, tangible use case or a utility that has enormous use cases across the ecosystem. And I think from a business perspective, this is important because in the next 10 years, I think a lot of the offline workflows will be heavily replaced by digital workflows. So then, you need to be able to kind of bring in authenticity, bring in verifiability into the data streams there. And I think fundamentally the reason for driving this is that if you look at all kinds of workflows, if you look at, say, banking, the cost of a bank servicing you at the bank branch is the highest. And then you have ATM, which is lesser. But if you look at some of the McKinsey studies, etc., they find that if you use digital technology, you can actually reduce the cost of servicing a customer almost up to 90%. Between 50 to 90% is the kind of cost savings that they find out. So I think it's got enormous usability as we kind of becoming increasingly digital society. Let me just stop there for now.
Satish, I think it's for you to say now.
Yeah, I think it's a good overview that Venky has provided. I think going back to your initial question of like blockchain of X versus the story around use cases. I think we're seeing multiple standards or multiple implementations based on the standards emerging, and many of those standards getting integrated into one or more blockchains in various ways. But end of the day, it's all about how do we simplify the management of information, right? It is all about like in a multi-stakeholder ecosystem, how quickly the information can be made accessible. And when you talk about accessibility, and it's not just about every data is available for everyone to see, it is more around like, yes, it is accessible, but it is still might be governed by various kind of consent mechanisms and other access policies, right? So one is like, how do we simplify the accessibility of information? The second is like, how do we actually make it interoperable in a way that I can look, irrespective of which stack an ecosystem use or which chain an ecosystem use, how do we make this information interoperable rather than kind of forcing everyone to use a particular stack? Because if you don't give choice, I think it is very difficult for many ecosystem to adopt such a new technology, right? Because what we are seeing even with open source is like for every problem that existed, there are multiple solutions, and people kind of build on a different solution based on various parameters they go through while building an application. So blockchain, in an essence, it should stay as a core utility that can simplify the management of information. And when we do that, we allow it in a way that it should be more participatory, be it in terms of expanding the network or running the network or sustaining the network. The participation should make sure that it behaves as an affordable or accessible tool for everyone in the ecosystem, be it small or big.
Amar?
Yeah, I mean, both Satish and Venky covered most of it. So I would add on to the same points, but in a way, like interoperability is a very key thing, right? And the hype and actually taking the essence, actual use case out of it from the hype is very key. So what we decided, and our understanding in this like space is the key challenge of where blockchain could be usable is actually bringing in the trust in the data, right? So where we can authoritatively say that, hey, this data was written by this particular entity and this is the identifier for that particular entity. So that identifier to the data mapping, I mean, it will be a blob technically, right? So, I mean, I may use some jargons technical, but the point I'm trying to make is the blockchain's success for us comes in that being a ledger, distributed ledger, where we can map between the data and the identifier who or which entity actually owns the data. That itself will bring that, what do you say, element of trust. So based on that, we believe there will be a whole lot of applications, lot of verticals which can solve all this problem which you talked about, right? So agriculture, fintech, or education, whatnot. So it is end of the day applications which has to solve a problem, but to build those applications with trust, we need a platform, and we believe in building that. And blockchain, at least in our understanding so far, can solve it in a right way if we use it in a right way.
Okay, so 3 things emerge out of this just 3-4 minutes of conversation, which is 1, the fact that blockchain is an utility. Second, the blockchain's core reason to exist in any IT infrastructure is to be able to enable data provenance. And the fact that rather than the blockchain for X, it is most important to actually understand the use case to be able to identify the value extracted out of the IT design choice that is. So by which I'm saying that there could be use cases where blockchain might not be the most appropriate fit now, because it might be the use case might not have matured to a point where it needs a blockchain, but it will need it soon enough. So let's kind of roll back and discuss these things. Like the fact that data is something that all 3 of you highlighted. And now data quality as a problem in large infrastructure projects has existed for long. And essentially there has been this joke or meme in the IT large production systems world that you can have the best system, but if you have garbage in, you'll get garbage out. And so it also means that there has to be a IT habit of being able to have data quality as a regime built around blockchain itself. And I'll probably go to Satish first and then Venky in terms of what your thoughts about this idea that blockchain pretty much ensures that data provenance and thus implies that data quality practices have to become forthright. Yeah, you're on mute, Satish. You're turning it.
Yeah, sorry. Yes, so data quality is an interesting aspect, and we can kind of look in data quality from with different lenses. One is in terms of how do we aggregate or where do we aggregate data from? Because aggregation from various sources is one of the most common methods by which most of the organizations work, and having an ability to kind of add a reputation to the provider, kind of saying that yes, the provider gives clean data or some kind of feedback goes back, that can actually help other ecosystem participant to kind of take a call whether to leverage this provider or not. So that is one way of looking at the data quality before even you start aggregating data. Now, once the data aggregation happens, and then it is all about how do we manage that data and how do we make it relevant, or how do we actually ensure the quality of the data as it go forward, because the data quality can be compromised in different ways, right? Because sometimes it could be an intentional compromise that happens to data, or sometimes it could be an unintentional thing that might be a result of backup, restore, or kind of some kind of maintenance activity which might go unnoticed, and then the things might come into picture maybe after 3 or 6 months down the line when people start seeing different results. So the second part, the way data quality can be ensured with the help of cryptographic technologies, and then with the combination of blockchain kind of adding identifiers or tokens to it, is to make sure that the repository of data or the aggregated data can always be compared against those kind of tokens, and see that and kind of ensure that the system can always ensure that they're dealing with the right set of data that they're expecting. So all kind of checks and balances can automatically be built, and the machines that been in as part of this process can always ensure that yes, those checks are all succeeding before they actually deliver a decision or a set of data points that will help an organization to take some decisions. So yeah, these are two common areas in terms of the source, quality of the source and the quality of the data stored. I think those are the two key metrics that happens. But with a model like identifiers, blockchains, tokens, and these all these cryptographic techniques coming together, there can be many new models that can be built, because the other things that we haven't explored much is about, like, once the data is in circulation, like I had data, that data goes through various kind of that data becomes part of various transactions, and that can also add to the reputation of data, or can enhance the quality of data, because it has been part of so many different transactions. So there could be many models that can be built on top of it, and which also ensure that an organization that's going to leverage the data set maybe at a later point does not need to go back to the verification of the root, because they know that it has been consistently being part of many transactions, and it has been part of successful transactions. So they can trust the point at which the data is now, and then kind of carry on the checks from there on, right? So yeah, it's a huge opportunity.
So if I add to what Satish just said, and look at it from a user perspective, I think in the next few years, what we'll see with platforms like the Open Network for Digital Commerce and others is that you will have data coming in from multiple sources, data being assembled and reassembled in real time, data being upgraded as a certain user journey progresses. So, for example, if I am a seller on the Open Network for Digital Commerce, what Satish just mentioned in terms of being able to attach reputation and keep updating that over a period of time, I think these things will have tremendous kind of value from a organizational perspective, from a commerce perspective, from the overall, let's say, reliability on the network. So ultimately, if I put it in one sentence, the problem that we are trying to solve using blockchain is, can I depend on this data? Can I trust on this data when I'm, making, say, a 1,000 rupee kind of, or a multi 1 lakh rupee, 10 lakh rupee decision in terms of buying something using, say, open network for digital commerce? Can I trust the reputation of this seller who is on this platform? And that chain of verifiability is basically what, the kind of platforms that we are building out enable. And I think this is extremely, extremely important because, one, I think in the next few years, decentralized e-commerce, decentralized finance, etc., are going to become a bigger part of the ecosystem as compared to centralized platforms that we have today. And second is that, verifying the data and being able to trust that data is going to remove one of the biggest pain points in e-commerce, in online transactions. So I think that kind of removing those biggest pain points is going to be something that unlocks a multi-billion-dollar economy, not just in India, but globally.
Right. Continuing with the topic of managing data, traditionally, I think the technical strategy around managing data can be broken down into a four-pronged approach, which is the first part is could be called data enumeration, which is about where is the data and what is the data. The next come obviously is mapping the data flows. So where is the data being acquired from and where is it shared to? The other part is, of course, categorizing the data. So you can label data based on various bits of sensitivity, or whether it's an aggregated data, anonymized data sets, and all that. So that's more linked to how you want to comply with specific data regulatory regimes in place. And the fourth and important part in any infrastructure is data access control, which basically is who gets access to data and how. So this kind of a question for Amar, I think, to begin with, is that it seems like to be able to have the ability to know where and what is the data, where it came from, and to where it is being shared. This particular part, which is the first, one of the two key parts of the technical strategy around data management, these are somewhat made easier if there is a distributed ledger or a blockchain in the architecture that manages the transactions and exchange of data. And just wanted to hear what you have to say about that.
Okay, so the first thing, let's just go back a step. Go a step back and say why blockchain itself, or why distributed or decentralized things, right? So as long as a company or a business or any entity, let's put it, right, so is managing its own data and it is dealing with that data, the whole point of all this where, who, and all that doesn't come, or even the extra trust, because it knows, okay, I received this data, it can put all the checks at its own servers and whatnot, right? The moment in the current world we see is it is no more possible that, because the same user for this business also will be user for some similar competitive businesses, or even or what do you say, add-on services from somebody else and all that. So it is a much distributed in just a single vertical, like I think Venky said, ONDC and similar things, right? Just a e-commerce. So it is no more just one seller or one online platform and one buyer or things like that, right? So I have so many apps in my phone, I may use it. So that is where the whole what do you say, how do I classify my data, I manage my data, how do I say I share this to this particular vendor and not this particular vendor, and all those things come into place. And to get to that architecturally, so that is where we break the data into actual data, as in what I purchased for what price and how many quantities. So that may be very personal to me, right? Because then what we do is anonymize it in a way that, hey, this data can be tokenized, right? And then this data can be, because I know my data, but when it goes to the ledger, distributed ledger, it can be a hash value or identifier value. That's where I was talking about identifiers before. So where that I understand this and somebody whom I share the data will understand what it is. And he can always go back and check in the ledger. But anybody else checking, they know that there is a transaction happened, but they may not get to the data itself, right? So, but they will still see from where to what happened or which entity to which entity it happened. They may not even realize which entity it is unless they are part of the registry or they have the access to the registry and things like that. So that is where I think the design decisions come in. That's where I was telling that the building of the blockchain is one part, and building application which can support or enhance the use cases will be one more challenge. So that's why we see it as a complete ecosystem, and applications are made to use your blockchains in a way where they can take care of all these data related elements with the metadata, like where and what and privacy and everything. So that's my very, what do you say, I think a tech jargon part of answer, I believe.
I'm making a list of things we need to explore, and that list keeps on getting interesting. But let's focus on a certain things now. Essentially, we are talking about the flow of data and the changes in the states of data, because every bit of data has its own life cycle. It changes state and it changes context. More importantly, more than state, it changes context. What a particular piece of data means to me might not mean the same to you, given the context in which we are viewing that piece of data or in which we are trying to consume it. The provenance allows me to ensure that we are looking at that piece of data with the same degree of trust. So basically, you and I, who are at two ends of a digital transaction, can rely on that and on the knowledge that that data has a known origin, has a known journey, and I can check all of that in a way. But this description also means that it is a end-to-end life cycle, right? So it is not just data stored off the ledger and then transactions which are tokenized and stored on the ledger. It also means that there has to be a set of applications that are developed that actually make use of this. And the question that I have for Satish is, what is the immediate incentive for applications to be able to gain from shifting to this model and thus be able to deliver better value to their end consumers? And by applications, I also mean services, by the way. So it's more of a broad usage of the term.
Yeah, good question. I think, yeah, before I explain the application benefits, I think, let me explain two meta concepts before we go there. Like, so the first thing is all about how do we actually create an ecosystem of tokens that represents various kind of data, right? And that is how do, in other words, okay, if we use blockchain, and if we use blockchain in a way that it starts to carry all kinds of data in its own form, sustaining the network over a period of time could be very, very challenging, because one of the key things is, like, apart from the privacy concerns, one of the other things when we model any kind of blockchain is to which is a distributed network, we need to make sure that we put absolute minimum information on a chain that is required to process a transaction, right? It is not, a blockchain is not a replacement for a distributed storage system or a distributed database. So you need to keep bringing mechanisms by which minimal data, maximum benefits, right? And at the same time, we also need to think from a data point of view in terms of how do we then make sure that data can be kept off chain and then still can be exchanged with multiple parties. That is where standards like verifiable credential or other data formats come into picture, which is something that can be trusted between the ecosystems or trusted within the ecosystem. They can say that, okay, this is how we are going to store data, or this is how we transform data based on various kind of use cases, and that is something that is accepted within the ecosystem. So that data transformation and data format is a key, and as long as if that can be on a open standard based format, it becomes much more easier for developers or ecosystem adopt it into their workflows. Now, coming to the second thing is like, now that we have these two different layers, one is a token that you're talking about, and the second is the data that is being stored off-chain within the control of the data owner. Now, this token that we are talking about is what we also refer as the data identifier. I think this is something that we have been working on for some time, and now it has reached a point of maturity that we can roll this out soon to market. So the identifier is a concept that actually take a piece of data, tokenize that, and the tokenized identifier has multiple attributes attached to it. It's not just going to say that it represents this data, but it can have other elements attached to it, saying that it can have identities attached to it, which can represent maybe a controller, or it can represent an ownership of the identifier. Now, the identity concept is also key here, because there could be tokens or identifiers that represents, say, assets or ownership that can actually go through multiple transfers over its lifetime, right? So which basically means that the identity keep on changing in those kind of identifiers. So you cannot make those changes. There are other kind of tokens that might not need that kind of capability, because those kind of data, like a academic credential or an ID card, those kind of things might not need a transfer capabilities, because those won't get transferred. So identity, getting a way to attach and detach identities from an identifier is a key thing to have. The second is about attaching what we call as a service endpoints or a messaging endpoints, in a way that in a consent-driven workflow, I think the initial data that might be given by the identifier when someone processes it could be a set of messaging endpoints or endpoints by which the relying party can contact and say that whether they can request more data, or they can verify data, or they can have many kinds of endpoints that can be attached to the identifier, which can do multiple things. So how do people discover that? So on scan of it, they can discover, saying that, okay, how can I get more information about this data without going anywhere? So that is embedded into the identifier, or solving the identifier actually keep those things. The third element is, okay, how do we actually make this identifier to capture the history, or capture the life cycle of this particular document or the record, which say that, okay, I have this data that has gone through multiple updates over a period of time, and the current state is this. Now, how do we kind of keep track of that in a blockchain way, and with minimal data on chain, but also making sure that anybody who is looking into that identifier knows that they are looking at data as the state at this particular point. So there are transactions below it, or there are transactions above it. So I think these are things that becomes very critical when it comes to adding this kind of identifier verifiable data into a transaction ecosystem. So now that we have one side, we have a mechanism by which we create this separation of what needed to be on-chain, what needed to be off-chain, and then the on-chain element is with this identifier that is self-resolvable and that can give various kind of attributes around the data depending on the use case. Now and then with these three things around, now that applications comes in the picture, right? When we do build applications, I think what the benefit this model kind of brings in is like the application does not need to go through, the existing application does not need to go through an entire refactoring. They only need to kind of enable or integrate these elements into the areas where they store data, or they publish data, or they kind of share data with somebody, saying that, okay, they're already doing it. Now that they're already doing a transformation using these kind of methodologies and kind of pushing it in a verifiable data format, or creating a token out of it and sharing it out. That will make it integration very, very easy for existing applications. And the bigger benefit is like, okay, this kind of model does not dictate dependencies or stacks, kind of saying that, okay, it does not dictate an ecosystem saying that, well, you can only leverage or you can only build application using this stack or this language. Okay, it is pretty much a choice depending on their interest in terms of how they want to build applications and how they want to, which standard they want to use to store data. So everything becomes a choice for them. So everything can work as it is today in terms of like how they start developing applications and start producing various kind of data artifacts. This just adds to it and kind of enables it to become a verifiable ecosystem. Because the key thing to remember here is, as Amar kind of pointed out, we all believe, there was a point where we always believed that, okay, the data that has been generated by a system is owned by the system, right? And everything is kind of siloed with the system. So, and anybody who wants to leverage the data need to have an API handshake or some kind of a handshake that happens, be it on a technical level or be it on a contract level. There should be some handshake that need to happen before that data can be reused with different contexts. But at the same time, even in the outcomes that is generated by those applications, even they don't know where all those details or those documents are getting used to, because there's no way they can actually figure those things out. So these kind of models make it much more friendly integrations or interactions and between different ecosystems. And there are models by which, yes, the issuers, or we call it as the controllers or the issuers of this data, can also be part of various transactions if the ecosystem wants them to be part of this transaction. So it is not like the issuers or the data producers kind of go out of the ecosystem once they generate the data. No, they can still be very much be part of the application ecosystem or the interaction ecosystem, if the ecosystem defines an interaction as like it's a three-party interaction that is required for this. Sorry, that was a long answer.
Oh, I think that kind of sets me up for the next thing that I wanted to check with Venky, but I don't know if do you want to have some remarks on what we just discussed? Because I have what I think is an interesting question for you.
Is that for me or for Amar?
No, I was looking at you, Venky, if you had any remarks to make after Satish, or else I have what I think is something I put to you to consider.
I think I'll just add to what Satish said. I think in the next few years, I think we'll see data flowing in from multiple sources into decentralized e-commerce platforms, decentralized finance platforms. So I think at that point in time, the value of a technology like this becomes really critical. I think it's like one of the most fundamental building blocks of a decentralized ecosystem. And let me just contrast that. In a centralized ecosystem, you have platforms like Amazon, et cetera, who deal with some of the issues like trust and reputation, et cetera, et cetera. But I think as we move back to the original ideals of the internet, which is as a distributed platform, I think we need these kind of infrastructure building blocks like the core blockchain platform, etc. So that's the quick reaction.
Okay.
Waiting for the next question.
No, that's interesting, because it links back to, you bring up the basic tenets of the internet, and I was going to ask you that we talk about decentralization, and one of the core driving forces in decentralization is this principle of subsidiarity, which means delegate as much to the endpoints. And because the internet essentially delegates a lot of power to the endpoints, it's not concentrated at the network layer itself. And while I was listening to how Satish was explaining it, one of the things that struck me is that the ability to have choice and the ability to have the flexibility to choose in which model you access your data, what you want to do with it, is a very powerful value, not very often baked into IT design. And then the lack of choice causes a cascading effect on the end consumer thing of it. And I wanted your thoughts on this idea that there is a possibility of creating a dynamic data economy that is built around choice and open standards, all the while using fundamentally proven, tested technologies that should build more confidence in those who are trying to build large-scale systems around it. And I just wanted to have your thoughts on that.
I think that's going to be a really, really critical, power shift in the next 8 to 10 years, in my opinion. The fact that, let's just take the example of, say, a restaurant who is on a centralized platform. I think the balance of power between the restaurant and the platform is what we are quite well aware of that. The balance of power between, say, the delivery boys and the platforms. I think one of the things that decentralization does is reset some of these power imbalances. So at a more immediate level, basically, I'm talking to some restaurant owners at this point in time. One of my friends is a big foodie and he wants to encourage, the specialized cuisines, the authentic specialized cuisines of different parts of India. And he wants to empower those chefs. Now, you can actually get those chefs onto a centralized platforms. But if they are on decentralized platforms, they have more control over the pricing. They have more control over, the delivery times, etc., etc. And the most important part is they have more control over the margins that they pay to the service providers and the other enablers of the ecosystem. So I think eventually, we will get into those kind of frameworks because of technologies like the Beacon protocol, because of policy initiatives like the Open Network for Digital Commerce, and we're already seeing this play out in Kerala with the Kochi Open Mobility Network, where drivers are onboarding themselves onto the Kochi Open Mobility Network. They are able to set their own kind of smart contracts, so to speak. And so I think the balance of power between the individual and the platforms got completely skewed with Web 2.0. And I think it also, from an individual to platform perspective, there is a rebalancing of the power dynamics. From the platform to the society level also, if you look at it, the enormous imbalances in terms of pricing power, in terms of shaping marketplaces, etc. So policymakers have been completely flat-footed when they completely did not anticipate Web 2.0 and the kind of network effects and the power imbalances that would happen because of that. So today, whether it's a government or whether it's an individual on the platform, both are powerless in responding to the power of the platforms. So there is, I think, a huge shift that we'll see for a bunch of reasons: policy reasons, business reasons, people pushing back against centralized platforms. And I think it's a historic opportunity for policymakers and for those who dream of a ideal of a decentralized open internet to leverage Web 3.0 to realize those dreams. We lost it with Web 2.0. I think if we lose it with Web 3.0, I think we only have ourselves to blame. So whether it's a long answer, but whether it's society or whether it's individuals, Web 3.0 can potentially rebalance those power dynamics.
Yeah, this is actually good. I think it's interesting because it started off with the very this conversation, at least just one of the few that we are going to set up later on as well, is that we started off with the idea that blockchain is a utility and it provides an ability to manage data in a way that makes sense, and it provides an opportunity for a set of services which might be decentralized to get created, and the various roles in this data exchange economy to have specific gains out of it. So no one is really a passive participant. Yeah. There is a whole bunch of activity and value addition. And we have reached a point where we are now discussing that whether the superstructure around us is ready to realize and incentivize the potential of this effort. Because we could have the best implementation of the blockchain, we could have the most effective data governance mechanisms built out in the blockchain, we could have the most phenomenal data provenance constructs cryptographically created. But if we do not also have good understanding and good support from regulations, policies, and incentives aligning together, I think it will not have the correct amplifying impact that we see. So that's one of the interesting parts of how we see this. So I was thinking, Venky, if you had anything that you wanted to specifically respond to with that. remark, that comment that I just had.
Yeah, so I think we are in a unique kind of a moment in history where technology is actually shaping policy. Earlier it used to be the other way around. It was policy that used to shape technology. So I bring this up because if you look at, say, the large platforms, they have pretty much shaped the technology. They have shaped the policies. They literally written the rules of the marketplaces. Uh, I think for a marketplace to be fair, equitable, balanced, you need the technology, you need the policy, and you need the rules of the marketplace. Uh, I think one of the really important things about decentralization, the promise of decentralization, I would say, it's not a realized goal at this point in time, but the promise of decentralization is that we can reset the power imbalances between the individuals and the platforms in society. But there is a lot of work to be done. I think we really need to do a lot of deep thinking around Web 3.0, and there are also a lot of concerns that Web 3.0 itself is a lot of hype and itself is becoming highly centralized. But that is not in the technology itself. It's how we shape that technology that really kind of uh, determines how the technology is rolled out, how it impacts society. I think one thing I really have to say here is that Indian policymakers seem to understand this. So if you look at the India Digital Enterprise Architecture 2.0 document, which Ministry of IT has released, I think they clearly see that the next wave of technology is going to be decentralized technologies, decentralized platforms, decentralized protocols, and I think that recognition is there. How do we leverage that policy support to build open marketplaces, open ecosystems? I think that's really where the rubber hits the road. Let me just stop there.
Okay. No, this is getting interesting, but this is also getting into territory where we'll end up having this recording session on, and we'll keep on discussing stuff. So I'll end up having to snip and edit videos, which I don't think is going to do justice to it. So here's what we are going to do. I think what we are going to do is follow up this conversation with another one coming up in the next, let's say, 20 odd days, with a bit more specific set of topics to do. We'll also open it up for more members of the community to join in the conversation should they wish, and have a bit more of like a ask us anything kind of feel to it. So it becomes a bit more engaging and give and take. And especially given that the distributed ledger based ecosystem of companies in India is growing, regardless of the fact that they are in specific silos, and some are in the specifically crypto, some are specifically in non-crypto space and all that. But I think the idea that the DLT is an utility creates a certain similar set of challenges and patterns that everyone would want to discuss. So we will do it, we'll continue this conversation in this way. And right now, I think I'm going to defer to Satish to check if he has some remarks that he wants to have before we wrap this one up.
I think, yeah, all I have to say is like it has been a pretty interesting discussion. I think in less than 40 minutes, I think we covered a lot of topics and very good pointers in terms of how things need to be taken forward. So I go back to what Venky said last. I think it is, so decentralization as a keyword is not just tech. I think tech is one part of it. And in terms of rolling out a decentralized platform or a decentralized ecosystem means a lot of things need to work together, need to come together, or we say that it all need to be intersecting at the right points, be it in terms of policies or standards or governance or various kind of things that need to come together, right? And so, our conversation going forward should, I think that we can also kind of drill deep into each of these topics and kind of say that like how and where the ecosystem stands today, because the Web3 ecosystem has come a long way in the last few years in terms of the technology maturity or the kind of standards and specs that is coming out, the governance model that is coming out. But that is not to say that, okay, yeah, it covers the needs of every ecosystem, right? So we can definitely kind of dive deep into each of those areas and trying to align it with ecosystem usage or application usage from different perspective. Like, okay, there could be adopters, there could be developers, there could be consumers. And in the process, it might be also a good idea to kind of say that we also address some of the myths in this space, because a lot of time we talk about DLTs or blockchain. I think it kind of get the discussion focused on two things, right? One is cryptocurrency, or specifically say Bitcoin. I think the entire conversation get towards the currency part of it. And the second is all about the discussions around consensus, or a blockchain is only needed when you have more than one party transacting with you or in an ecosystem. So I think in some ways the second is a necessity for some of the interactions, but it is not the entire value that a chain or a network can provide, right? Rather than we getting into details of why I said so, I think maybe that is something that we can follow up in a separate conversation.
All right. I guess we will wrap up the conversation here for today. I will be adding some context to when we post it to our YouTube channel, and also when we post it out to various social media channels, encouraging everyone in the community to join us, because I don't think this is specifically a very Dhiway centric conversation. Yes, of course, Dhiway is one of the players in this entire effort, but getting everyone to discuss, to talk, and also to be able to have a good constructive view on how to address certain challenges, how to also move the direction of not just the business, but policy forward in the way that is focused on growth of the entire community, I think is very, very key. It has to be a strong, concerted, long haul effort. It is not going to happen right in the next 6 months or a year or so. This is going to take a lot of doing. So thank you, all three of you, for joining today, and lovely conversation. I wish we could do more of this today, but I guess we're going to have to park it for the next one that's coming up. So
Thanks,
let's see how that goes.
Thank you, Sankarshan.
Thank you, Sankarshan.